off, I think we're going to have people joining us, but I really want to maximize the time that we've got you. So good morning, and this is the fifth of our Keynote series addresses for 2025. It's a new series this year of conversations designed to touch on the big issues that concern us as a nation and communities across Australia. And today we're looking at the link between prosperity and place, and it's great to see people jumping on from across Australia. I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands on which we're based and their connections to land, sea and community. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and other First Nations people joining us today. And wherever you are in Australia, I hope you're rugged up. It really is winter today. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Josie Gibson, and I support the dynamic team behind the Resilience Canopy, which is building a national network of peers, collaborators and partners to support the critical work of future-focused communities and resilience practitioners around Australia. And just a little bit about what's coming up in the collective program in the next few weeks. We have another Keynote series session coming up in early August on the 6th. Thanks really to our guest speaker today. We're featuring UCL Professor John Tomini and OECD researcher Talia Melik, joining us from Durham in the UK and Paris respectively in the middle of summer there. And they'll be talking about strategies to address what they are calling left behind places, a terrifically relevant conversation to what we're about to talk about today. On August the 21st, we have a negotiation masterclass for our practitioners and friends with the fabulous Sam Trattles, who is based in Sydney. She's a seasoned strategic negotiator and founder of The Other Side of the Table. Our September Keynote series address is with Michelle Jondro, lead researcher and executive director of SGS Planning and Economics. She'll be talking about their latest Cities and Regions Wellbeing Index. And we've just confirmed a Keynote series address on October the 8th with Duncan Shepherd, who's resilience lead with the Insurance Council of Australia, and Melinda Morris, a climate change adaptation and resilience specialist and founder of the Resilient Futures Investment Roundtable. And they'll be discussing different ways to mitigate climate risk, which of course is a really, really big issue right across the board. Doesn't matter where you are in Australia, it's going to be on the table for discussion. And lots more as we approach spring and summer. So keep abreast of the latest on the Resilience Canopy website. And just a reminder that these sessions are recorded so that we can share with members of the network who can't be with us today and interested members of the public. So it's my great honour now to welcome our guest today, Australian business leader and strategist Narelle Kennedy AM, joining us from the beautiful Impact Story Lab in downtown Sydney, and a big thanks to Amelia Loy for organising this. Narelle is the founder and managing director of the Kennedy Company, and as we said in the note that we sent around for this session, a true trailblazer, and I don't use that term lightly, a genuine pioneer in business and civic innovation and place-based strategies to build shared prosperity. As founding chief executive of the influential Australian Business Foundation for 16 years, Narelle was one of the first to really look at this idea of place-based approaches and commissioned research around it, drawing on her broad expertise in economic and regional development, business and social innovation, policy and strategy, small business and skills development, and her deep interest in community and individual well-being, which stems from the very early chapters in her career. As you'll hear shortly, Narelle remains absolutely passionate and actively involved in the big discussions in this country about emerging business issues, competitiveness and future trends. She continues to be a director on boards and advisory councils and is affiliated with leading organisations and entities, including Chief Executive Women, the Australian Technology Showcase, and the Enterprise Workshop Program. She's represented Australia at the Business Advisory Committee on the OECD and has served on the expert panel for the review of Australia's innovation system in 2008. And it must be just about time for another innovation review, Narelle, I reckon, as the clock ticks over. Narelle was made a member of the Order of Australia in 2014 for significant service to business in Australia through a range of policy development and advisory roles. She was also awarded a Centenary Medal for service to Australian society through economic and industry policy research. I could spend the next hour talking about Narelle's accomplishments, which are extraordinary. But just having spent a little time with her, what really impresses me is her uncanny ability to identify big patterns, trends, the emerging opportunities. I call that seeing around corners. Bring the right people together at the right time and catalyze action where and when it needs to happen. And she hasn't done this just once, but many times over the years. So we've asked Narelle to reflect on the link between prosperity and place. And we were just talking about coming on the call. A new parliament has just started sitting with over 40 new MPs. Productivity, innovation are high on the agenda. So this is a really important conversation. So Narelle, thank you so much for making the time to join us. I'm going to hand over to you. Narelle will speak for a little bit and then we'll finish up with some Q&A. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Josie, and thank you so much for those kind words. It's an honour to be here today, and I'm hoping to be able to draw on research and practice, not only my own, but those of colleagues, in order to address your interest in building and sustaining resilient communities. I'm going to look at 3 insights and 1 hopeful speculation. We could actually just turn on the next slide. The 3 insights are about reclaiming innovation, the power of place, and active ingredients for prosperous communities. And the hopeful speculation is about whether innovation and place-based policies could actually be an antidote to the alienation from the political system that I think seems to be increasing in our society as we go on, demoralising tone. Anyway, let's start with reclaiming innovation. Innovation is actually a confusing word. It's something that if you've got 10 people around the table, there'll be 12 different aspects of what innovation actually means. Innovation is a key driver of prosperity and resilience, but there are common misunderstandings where innovation is equated only with advanced technologies, new to the world inventions and discoveries, R&D expenditure, creativity, entrepreneurial startups. It's not just that. Similarly, people talk about innovation limited to new products or occasionally to services, and for it to be the exclusive province of nerds and boffins, the knowledge workers, VCs, venture capitalists, and tech geniuses. Well, those are all important elements, but they're not the full picture. Innovation is more than just new ideas and technologies. It's more than just well-funded paths to commercialisation from mind to market, which is criticised in Australia as not being there. Rather, innovation is actually a broader and more open concept from my work. The definition of innovation that I would put forward simply is creating and capturing value from doing something new and needed. So there's a question of novelty, there's a question of demand, and there's a question of action executed, implemented, not just a good idea. It's really important, I think, to not overlook non-technical innovation or the steady incremental ingenuity of lots of small, behind-the-radar mainstream businesses. The take on innovation that those companies and enterprises do is what I term the human dimensions of innovation, as opposed to the technical and commercial. And I'm wanting to concentrate a little bit on that today. Central to that wider view of innovation is the concept of learning. That is the absorption and transfer of knowledge. Learning by doing, learning by applying and using existing knowledge and productive technologies, and that's where they come into play. And then learning by interacting with others, whether that's through personnel movements, through industry clusters, through concepts like the digital, the impact lab that we're working from today. Actually, what I did forget to say right at the start is this wonderful mural behind me is been done by I've lost the names here, by Jason Wing and Maddie Wing, who are Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And it is really a rather marvellous space here. So if you're in the neighbourhood, you should come and have a look. Sorry about the disturbing that, but I meant to say that earlier. Yeah, just going back to the concept of innovation, learning is actually quite, if we could actually do the next slide, innovation is very much about not just knowledge workers, not just high-tech, first in the world advances, but broader and open to all, creating value by doing something new and needed. And the idea of something being put into action is actually quite, innovation hinges on that, and the concept of demand-driven and being and learning. Innovation occurs in how enterprises absorb and diffuse knowledge, how they manage their people, for example, in their relationships with customers and other parties, in their organisational processes, just the way they do things, their understanding of markets, and most importantly of all, the business model that they use in order to earn revenue and sustain the business. Innovation can happen at all of those touch points. So from my point of view, it's time to reclaim that the human dimensions of innovation and make sure that that democratisation of innovation is alive and well, because it multiplies the ways to innovate. There are multiple ways of innovating, and it's not just for the high-tech advances that seem to be at the heart of what policymaking is about. There's a really good article by a University of Queensland professor, Tim Castell, in a LinkedIn article, I think it was about July the 8th, talking about innovation for SMEs, a practical guide. And he he communicates well and simply about what that human dimension of innovation is about. His conclusion is that it's more widespread than we think. Next slide, please. Just as the multiple places, the multiple opportunities for innovation. The power of place lies in the fact that there is a widespread and deeper understanding of what place is about. Typically, innovation and industry policies are spatially neutral. However, by adding a place-based perspective, it allows for tailoring policies to the different circumstances of locations and sectors. There's variety and diversity that we can look at, which is really at the heart of the evolution of place. Place is more than standard physical planning concepts of placemaking that we hear about quite a lot, based on real estate management, land use planning, and smart infrastructure. All of them are good things, but they're not the only thing when we look at the concept of place. We understand place very much as physical proximity. Regions, districts, local communities, neighbourhoods, hubs, precincts, industry clusters, urban renewal, lands and employment lands. These are all facets of the physical location, places, physical location. Those involved are usually in close geographic proximity to each other, and that proximity is the basis for relationships to be forged and shared interests to be activated. So we kind of know those things. But now proximity has changed. Place now includes digital and virtual space. The advances in IT and in social networks, social media, allow for the expansion of online communities of interest, self-organising and often globally working in digital and space, using smart technologies, online technologies, opens up new capabilities and markets that even 10, 20 years ago were not possible, because they allow for the agglomeration of customers and demand that you wouldn't have been able to develop. Examples like Uber, examples like Zara with their fast response mechanism. And there are quite a lot of other examples. If you look at the work of John Besson, who's on the list of references that that will be circulated, he has a 1,000,001 case studies about well, perhaps not 1,000,001. So advances in digital technologies can deliver transformations in capability in organisations, as well as new products and services. Place can also be understood from another angle. It explains a position in an organisation or in a competition. It can have a more intangible effect. Place is a home. Place is a sense of belonging. Place is a community of like-minded people, or something being satisfactorily in its correct position. All of those aspects of place represent potential pathways to prosperity. So I guess what I'm saying is that we need to expand our understanding both of innovation and of the concept of place. Just a few comments about designated innovation spaces, variously called innovation districts, precincts, or hubs. While you can make distinctions between each of those things, for the purposes of this presentation, I'm lumping them all together. Those innovation districts, etc., are often you often hear aspirations of, let's make this our local Silicon Valley. You look at Sydney's Tech Central, Melbourne Monash University's Health Precinct, Tonsley Park in Adelaide, and so on. There are a number of them. Such innovation places are a highly favoured strategy both in Australia and globally. A rich concentration of high-tech enterprises, entrepreneurs, world-class universities and researchers, attracting global talent and investment, quality jobs and high-growth industries. They're lauded for the positive spillover effects they have, particularly in business formation and economic benefit. You know, what's not to love? But a cautionary note. Innovation districts can have shortcomings that undermine social well-being and cohesion. And I draw that out. I point to a joint article that I wrote with Dr. John Howard, not the actor, not the former Prime Minister, the other John Howard, who we did an article for the Economic Development Australia Journal where we canvassed some of those shortcomings. And there's work on the Kennedy Company website and on the Acton Institute for Policy Research and Innovation, which is John Howard's initiative, where a lot of that is documented and sourced. In short, those sorts of innovation districts can trigger gentrification with rising costs, competition for affordable housing, property speculation, environmental stress through excessive energy use and waste generation, and inequities through wealth concentration, wage stagnation for non-tech workers, and a loss of community identity where everything gets homogenised and there's a sort of frictionless environment in which creative people live. So we have to be aware of those downsides or those potential downsides, and careful design and attention is needed to ensure innovation places can fulfill their promise of both economic impacts and providing livable, harmonious communities. John Howard, again, has actually written a paper which is part of a collection that he's just published as a book about the integration imperative, looking at innovation districts that work. He identifies 4 vital and interrelated concepts that need to be worked on simultaneously. They are placemaking, in the sense that we talked about them before, economic development, commercial viability, and governance. So the conclusion that I reach is that what makes a place smart is not the location of universities surrounded by tech hubs and industries of the future, or the operation of clever, smart digital infrastructure, transport links, and physical amenity. All of those things are important, but rather smart places really really impact, because that's where change happens, change that affects and benefits the whole of the community rather than just those involved in high-tech activities. They are the crossroads. Smart places are the crossroads where different knowledge sources flow and meet, capture value, and do things together. Moving on to, well, what does that mean for the active ingredients for prosperous communities? The discipline of innovation management connects prosperity to place and provides insights on the active ingredients required for communities and organisations to prosper. I'd refer you to a lot of the research by Professor Mark Dodson and his colleagues. Mark's at the University of Oxford and an emeritus professor at the University of Queensland. Innovation management studies seek to explain how value from innovation is created, captured and deployed, and how it makes a positive impact on communities at large. There are three key lessons that I would draw out for you to think about the ingredients for prosperous communities. The first thing is knowledge flows are more important than knowledge stocks. This is a supply and demand issue. We want to concentrate on demand more than supply. Our goal is not so much increasing the supply of research and technology as it is to look at fostering a critical mass of agile enterprises that are using and diffusing knowledge to solve problems that matter to communities and to organisations. The focus is more, as I said, on demand rather than supply, more on the users of knowledge rather than the producers of knowledge. And that kind of that's an edgy proposition when a lot of our policies are based on needing to increase R&D spending and the like. Moving on to the idea that innovation is not a solitary pursuit. We often get mesmerised by the gifted tech genius or the lone scientist in the lab, when in fact we are talking about an innovation ecosystem of businesses, researchers, entrepreneurs, universities, consumers, government agencies, where collaboration skills and explicit bridge building is actually key. Collaboration needs deliberate effort to capture opportunities, to solve problems by cross-fertilisation of knowledge and expertise. It involves action to build relationships and trust, to broker compromises, and to negotiate around diverse and sometimes contradictory propositions and outlooks. Innovation ecosystems are not just passive agglomerations and groupings of interested parties networking together. It's not a soft asset like that. They are adaptive and highly interactive entities that mobilise action. And that doesn't happen by osmosis. It happens by deliberate effort. It's not because they are co-located, but because of the density and quality of the engagement with each other, whether that's in the knowledge flows that I just spoke about, or whether it is in joint ventures, in worker mobility, or in institutional arrangements that are negotiated. It's important that innovation is seen at its core as social and relational rather than technical and transactional. There's a dynamic going on there. Effective innovation ecosystems go beyond formal alliances, and they allow for serendipitous creative collisions of ideas, and they serve as safe places for enterprises to experiment with new and better ways for their businesses and communities to prosper. So that idea of slightly chaotic engagement and interaction that can come up with surprises and remarkable outcomes. But it does need the bridge builders to make that happen. And the third key lesson is don't forget the everyday economy. By the everyday economy, I mean all of those things, the goods and services that sustain our daily lives. The essential workers of the everyday economy are people like nurses and teachers and aged care and childcare workers, people in transport, in retail, logistics and the like. The everyday economy warrants attention because it affects everybody. And it includes the growing care economy, whose work reinforces the social ties that are crucial for social cohesion and resilience, belonging, and a sense of community identity. Strengthening the performance of the everyday economy is an innovation strategy because it unlocks the untapped potential of communities. This has been referred to as the economics of belonging by financial journalist and author Martin Sandbu. It's worth having a look at his book of that name. But what's needed are practical initiatives to encourage community-led change. They are a necessary strategy for that everyday economy to be put into action. It's about economic development being joined up with community development. What's the overlap? I'd suggest you take a look at activities and organisations working on things like place-based capital or community wealth building, or indeed, as Josie outlined earlier, some of the upcoming events of your series, the wellbeing economy and the work that SGS Economics and Planning are doing on that regional and cities index. Moving on now to a quick comment about that hopeful speculation I mentioned. Over and above the dynamics of place-based innovation, the link between prosperity and place may offer an antidote to the increasing distrust and disengagement of our political system with a strategy of going local. I did hear, this is a few years ago now, Terry Moran, who's the expert policy analyst and former head of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, he made a call for localism to drive Australia's future prosperity in the face of public dissatisfaction with politics and the erosion of deep-seated expertise and experience in the public service. His assessment was that the public rift with government comes from the fracturing of communities, the perceived lack of fair treatment, poor experiences of service delivery, and general distrust of government's plans and ability to improve the lives and the prospects of ordinary people. Murad's prescriptions for action include joined up government programs at a local level, the inclusion of local people in co-designing programs and resource allocations, and more local decision-making and accountability. In short, more local action closest to where people are most affected. Further, action in local communities provides a sort of living innovation lab, if you like, to road test different approaches that are customised to the different circumstances of different places. The hope is that going local will signal government openness and leadership, result in improvements on the ground that will shift the public mood. I am hopeful that that might be the situation, because we saw months in from the pandemic where the the 2001, I think it was, Idleman Trust Barometer, actually in Australia, actually had people's trust in government rising, because they saw the pandemic was being handled well. They thought through cooperation, competence and compassion. And that was the national cabinet process. Whether that didn't last long, but it shows you we can do it if we try. Okay, well, just drawing final conclusion with the next slide. My comments today, I guess, have deliberately blurred boundaries, because I think that's where we get some fresh insights. Exploring ideas that seem contradictory but suggest further insights and action. For example, integrating economic growth with social well-being. Taking account of both technology and the human dimensions of innovation together. The idea of business innovation and community-led change not being at opposite ends of the spectrum, but being able to be joined together in some way. The knowledge economy versus the everyday economy. And overall, economic development and community development being harmonious fellow concepts. The cross-fertilization that implies results in two new angles on how innovation contributes to prosperity, and how the concept of place has matured beyond the discipline of physical planning and the spatially neutral economic policies that have been the fashion. The combination of those two factors opens up more potent options for empowering resilient communities. So that's where I'd leave it, Josie, and open to questions and discussion.
Thank you so much, Narelle. There's just some very big threads there to jump on. Marie, maybe to kick off, you commented on that Narelle's concept of knowledge flows, which I think is certainly one of the kind of key themes that is encouraged in the work with community through the resilience canopy. Do you want to talk to that? Because it sort of relates to work that you've done previously as well.
Yeah, look, and thanks so much, Narelle. Wonderful presentation and such important, I suppose, really poignant points, that you make, particularly at this, point in time. So yeah, I suppose that really just resonated with me, hearing what you said about knowledge flows are more important than knowledge stocks. And I feel like, from my perspective, sometimes what I was thinking when you were speaking was that sometimes when knowledge is generated and thought of as stocks or assets, almost, that they are often withheld and become protected and are not shared for the benefit of our community to learn from. And that kind of led me to think, sometimes in working with academics, and not discounting the work of academics at all, but sometimes the knowledge that is generated is held in ways where it can't be translated and shared and then implemented, in our real world. And you made the comment when you were speaking, Narelle, you said, this is not soft. And I think that in this work of resilience, often we hear that the social activity and the relational activity between people that really builds the social bonds um, is soft work, and sometimes it's really hard to, document it in a way that can indicate to funders that it's really important. It's actually the hard stuff, isn't it?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, interested in your kind of
yeah.
thoughts on, how do we amplify this understanding that this is the hard work?
Mm. I think one of the things that I talk to people about is that knowledge is one of the few resources that doesn't diminish with use. It
Mm.
actually, it actually multiplies with use, and often people kind of get that that there's something in it for me. If I cooperate with you and share knowledge, then what I get back is something more than I gave. So it's in my self-interest to do it, and that might be venal, but I think that's one approach that I have taken, and I think the other one is start with the low-hanging fruit. The path has to start somewhere, and I think that's that's the best comment I can make at the moment.
There's an interesting thread that's come through a number of the sessions this year, and we did host Megan Burkett
Oh,
earlier in the year to talk
yeah,
about the place-based capital.
yeah,
And one of the things that I took out of that session, which I've heard repeated, is often you don't know what's already in front of you, like the hidden assets, the knowledge assets, the capabilities of that everyday economy that you talked about.
yeah.
From a regional community perspective, and I'm sure you've seen this play out, um, is it a case of just starting somewhere, getting people in the room, starting to have those conversations about what we want our community to look like? I mean, has that been where a lot of these really interesting catalytic efforts start, with those
Yeah,
kind of conversations?
I think looking for putting yourself in the shoes of somebody else, and what would motivate them to want to share and start. Some of the translation of academic research. I was in a position when I was chief executive of the Australian Business Foundation, which was an entity that was a spin-off out of a major industry association. So you had lots of companies who were both informants for that research and who were distribution channels for the knowledge. And so what I was able to do, and I think this is what I mean by bridge builders or intermediaries, you need people who are actively there as part of the infrastructure to translate and to speculate on what academic achievement, academic evidence is about. The academics themselves may not be able to do that because they see it as it's not cut and dried for the academics from their perspective. But if I was to say, okay, there's a study on how services are growing as part of the manufacturing process. So to go to a manufacturer and say, hey, John, there are more opportunities for you to make money from your company than you've thought of. And this study about the servitization of manufacturing tells you something about that. And here am I going to translate that for you? Oh, crikey, I'm really interested in that. So I think it's putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and trying to find the hooks that will attract them.
Yeah, I love that idea of having translators and speculators. Um,
Mm.
so please, opening up. I've done a lot of talking.
Yeah.
I guess just following on from some of those themes, the concept that you mentioned about innovation being social and relational and not necessarily technical, that stood out to me as well from a regional perspective because it helps
Okay.
break down that barrier that innovation is something more technical and not available and not existing already within the minds of the people who work and live in regional areas.
Yeah.
I wonder, have you got any examples of how else to describe that innovation so that it doesn't seem people think technical and business hubs and instead of
Yeah.
just ideas and trust in each other?
Yeah. The article that I mentioned by Professor Tim Castell at the University of Queensland was a LinkedIn article called Innovation for SMEs, a Practical Guide. And that's a really good, it's a show, like he doesn't talk about, he doesn't really talk about innovation. He talks about doing things better, making sure people are involved, uh, um, giving people new ideas and challenging them to work out how to put them into action. Um, so like it goes back to basics. And I think sometimes it's a matter of language and just trying to, a lot of what I've done, I think, has been using all of that technical and academic research to to interpret back to people that that they are innovating. There are a lot of companies, ordinary companies, especially in regional Australia, who, oh no, Narelle, that's just good management. And you say, but that is what innovation's all about. And so I've done a lot of translating back, like Berenberg jams and condiments. You've probably seen those. They're a family-based company out of the Adelaide Hills. They've invested in lots of good equipment so that they are efficient producers and so on. But where they're not a high-tech company, but they can charge a mozza in supermarkets for their products that are this big, and because they do a lot of work on the sourcing of those products, who has manufactured, whose idea was it to have Narelle's brand chutney, and they have a little story about the person. They also allow you to go in and do recipes, and then they're part of the tourism industry, food and wine and experiences. And so they make money at each of those points. But you wouldn't call them a high-tech company. The technology that they use is, the equipment that they use is state of the art, and they've invested in it, but it gives them new capabilities. It's not because it's leading edge technology. So, yeah.
And that's half the challenge of getting regional businesses and community leaders to share their stories and not have that tall poppy fear that like sharing their stories and actually seeing themselves as innovators is really interesting.
Telling you about the mistakes and the failures, because that to me, it's that says that it's a work in progress.
Yeah. I think your point about language and bringing together, for example, you talked about bringing together community development and economic development. You're talking two very different tribes in a lot of cases, and they kind of coexist in regional Australia, but they might not necessarily cross paths. So there would be great opportunity, Lyndall, for example, to kind of deliberately target different members of the tribes to bring together and act as that, what was it, a translator and speculator to create a new conversation.
And also pick a project that
Yeah.
is relevant to both of them. Start with one project where they're all, there are both community benefits and economic benefits, commercial benefits. The city of Liverpool in Sydney is thinking about this at the moment, where they're, I think they're looking at a further education activity and how that leads to jobs for people who don't necessarily have university education. So there's social benefits from making sure that people who have been left out of higher education get a second chance. And there's a economic benefit, obviously, for workforce participation and what it adds to the economy of the city. So pick a project where both sides of that equation could be engaged.
Brilliant. Amanda, Amanda's already asking for some of the references, so clearly some of this is resonating with you.
Yeah, the references, I have done a list of references that I'm sure that can be circulated to people.
Yep. Amanda?
Yeah, thanks, Sophia. I'm Amanda. I'm from the Municipal Association of Victoria. So yeah, big thank you to Natalie Stacks for inviting me along today. I found it particularly useful, Narelle, especially first of all, the UQ article sounds great about being able to frame in organisations what is innovation, and let's not get carried away that it's purely like tech on its own and that it's not about social capital. The other thing that I found particularly useful is, and I've got those chutneys in my fridge, but I have forgotten the brand. Just thinking about that from those multiple points around thinking about innovation in a new way and the link with tourism. And it made me really think about in regional communities how all these little gin manufacturers have popped up as well. And they wouldn't be they wouldn't have the great tech in terms of doing that, but are surviving and thriving and creating tourism in their towns and communities as well, and employment and all those ongoing benefits. So I really wanted to thank you today for me personally about helping join some of the dots in those basics and really improving and sharpening our language around this work as well.
Yeah, I don't tend to use the word innovation very much.
Neither do I.
For someone who's made a habit of it, working on it over the years, but I just think you have to tailor it to your audience, and I'm hoping that things like the productivity roundtable that the Treasurer and the federal government is planning for the end of next month, will be able to move beyond R&D spend as being the only indicator of innovation capacity.
So just with that in mind, Narelle, how important is it to capture some snapshots and some stories of the kind of work that is actually happening out on the ground across regional Australia to feed back into Canberra?
The more you
to kind of show that it's already happening.
Yeah, the more that you can. I mean, this is a contested area.
Yeah.
I'm making a call for the democratization of innovation, if you like.
Yeah.
Whereas there's a study I just saw lately of, I think it was McKinsey and Company, who did some work, and I don't know how good the study is. I haven't looked at it properly, but they are contending that the real productivity effects of innovation is restricted to the gazelle firms, the firms that are high growth, and there's a small number of them who count for the vast proportion of productivity growth.
Yeah.
So the consequence of that is that you concentrate on them rather than the great unwashed.
Yeah.
And
that's absolutely contestable.
Well, but that is contestable, but there are other views going to government than the one that I have put. So we have, once again, it's the dialectic. You have to have a look at both of those points of view and start to see, well, what does that mean? Like, does the conclusion, even if that was true, that a lot of it's the big and the high growth firms that count for more. That doesn't necessarily mean that you don't care about the rest of them, because in local communities, if you're talking in that angle, in that microcosm, they are really critical.
Yeah, yeah. And that sort of shines a spotlight on, Amanda, the work of organisations like yours that are kind of the network-based conveners, if you like, and pipelines for some of these stories. Also the Resilience Canopy with the case study work, the stories from community filtering back and using different language. So, I'm afraid that we're actually out of time, Narelle, but really, really want to thank you for providing some really useful provocations for each of us as we return to our practices. But I think one of my takeouts from this is to think more broadly about concept of place and the way that you've tied it to what you've termed innovation, but how we might challenge and translate some of that world's language, and using resources like Tim Castell's fantastic work to take these stories out more broadly. Because if you have that very narrow frame, then on a lot of measures, Australia might be struggling. If you use a different frame, actually, there are hotbeds of great activity everywhere. We're just not hearing about it as much. And it takes your work and that of your peers, Narelle, to actually keep that on the table. So on behalf of everybody, we want to thank you for joining us today and sharing your research and insights. So thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.